Hi everyone, WarcryLive here, and today I wanted to show you guys a week 1 build overview of my Mind Over Matter CI Archmage Stormweaver Spark build. We're now level 87 and the build is feeling incredibly strong across red maps. The clear and defenses are fantastic, and bosses get lasered down whilst barely being able to move at all. I'll show some footage in the background, but there are a fair few key changes made to the build since my day 2 update video that I'm excited to share. The two most notable of which being adding cold and freeze to the build, whilst maintaining our double shock scaling from our ascendancy, as well as adding an Eldritch battery to gain a near 4k mana and ES pool. Both of these changes rely on how PoE2 calculates conversion versus gained as modifiers differently than PoE1, namely conversion occurring first and gained mods happening after. This means that we can use high ES gear to convert our energy shields to mana, scale that with percent increases to mana, then use the unique amulet Everlasting Gaze to gain 30% of our mana back as ES, and then scale that with percentage increases to energy shield, making for an incredibly tanky and high damage build with efficient scaling and a high investment ceiling. I'll go into more detail on how we scale freeze in the gear and passive tree section of this video, but right now you can see a tier 15 copper citadel in the background, which barely felt like a challenge with how much chill we stacked on the boss and how slow he moved as a result. Side note, these maps are really profitable to run at the moment, with keys, well the keys these guys drop, selling for around 25 exalts a pop. So I highly recommend you push into these higher tiers yourselves as soon as you can. Jumping right into it, I'll first be going over all of our gem setups, followed by our gear, passive tree, weapon swap setup, as well as a few tips and tricks on how to get yourself better ES gear for cheap, and the bases I recommend highlighting on your loot filters. Starting off with gems, we run a 6-link spark setup with Arcane Tempo for faster cast speed, Inspiration to help support our Archmage mana cost, Lightning Mastery for a higher level of our Spark gem, Glaciation for helping with our freeze buildup and our cold damage, and lastly Acceleration. This last gem is up to personal preference. I ran Pierce for a while, increased duration, tried that out as well. I settled on Acceleration because it felt the best while mapping, and bossing just didn't seem to change too much from these choices. This is supported by an Orb of Storms. We run Overabundance, so we can place down 2 at once, and this helps to clear packs that are a bit more difficult or sort of extra damage down for bossing. I support this with Lightning Exposure, so that I can inflict Lightning Exposure and lower the resistances of our enemies, as well as Font of Mana, so this gives us more mana regen while we're standing in the region or the area of our Orb of Storms. Mana Tempest, which I find myself using less frequently as of late, rather than Sigil of Power, but it is another source of damage that we can put down that drains your mana quite heavily. I support this with Premeditation and Energy Barrier. Conductivity is our curse of choice, and I link this with Impending Doom as well as Focused Curse. We have our Archmage, which is currently standalone, and this brings us to our Offhand setup. So currently I have Blink selected only in my Offhand, and Archmage is toggled only in my main hand. That way, when I weapon swap, I can blink, and we still have the original 100 spirit that we need for our build. So, similarly, Conductivity is currently set only on our second weapon set, because we use this to curse with faster cast speed on a +6 lightning staff, as well as everything else being set to our main hand only. That way the only time we need to press the weapon swap skill is when we want to start blinking around, which, you know, feels very nice and smooth during mapping, and at the moment we need to spark, it just automatically swaps back for us. Looking at our gear, we have a +4 lightning spells wand with some cast speed and damage gained as extra cold, which helps with us freezing enemies and gaining an additional sort of portion of our lightning damage as cold. We just run general ES gear with as high ES and resistances as possible. Mana and energy shield are interchangeable because we use Eldritch Battery, so where mana or energy shield prefixes, wherever we can get them, are basically trying pushing up that mana pool as high as we possibly can. Same thing for boots here: res, movement speed, energy shield, and mana across the sort of helmets and chest and gauntlets and boots. Chest, similarly here, we're running a 750 ES chest piece, which is not that expensive nowadays. You can get one for 10 to 20 exalts. If you're looking for above 800, that's where the price starts getting a little punchier. But you know, 700 is, or even 600 is a great place to start with the build. And here's where we get to our more build-defining uniques, namely the Everlasting Gaze, as we just discussed, which gives us our mana as additional energy shield. I have allocated Unbound Focus as our anointment here, which gives us Magnitude of Chill as well as Magnitude of Shock and their respective durations as well, which synergizes very well with this build. I'm also currently using a Call of the Brotherhood. Now here's where we need to discuss the conversion a little bit. So conversion only works with initial damage that we have on our gem. Any added damage, such as that by our Archmage, will not get converted. This, however, is ideal in this scenario because we don't really want to stack pure cold. We still want the majority of our damage to be lightning. As we can see here, lightning still makes up the majority of our damage. I'd say about 70% here. This means that we're still gaining shocks and we're able to double shock on our enemies very reliably, but chill, which as an ailment doesn't require as strong hits to proc, as long as we have very, very fast casts, as we do with Spark, and magnitude and effect stacked across our tree, which we also have, we're able to reliably chill and freeze even tier 15 bosses without necessarily needing more than 30% of our damage to be cold. So the Call of the Brotherhood works really well for this. It converts the initial Spark light damage into cold, but then all of our Archmage damage is still going to be added as our sort of brunt lightning DPS overall, which works with our penetration, our exposure, and so forth. In our other ring slot, we have cast speed, mana, and some resistances. This is quite a nice ring I managed to pick up, but overall, all you want on your rings are cast speed, res, mana. You can certainly sacrifice on the mana being over 100 or the cast speed being in the 20s. This is just kind of a high-end version of what that can look like. And belt is just a very general strength res belt. The key mod that we're looking for here is mana again, with 113 mod there, and I managed to pick up some stun threshold as well because that was an issue I was facing. Lastly, on our shield, I have enough strength there to be able to have us actually run it. The most important mod on the shield is the block chance. So that's another change that we've made since our previous video. We're now running block, which is incredibly helpful in our survivability, especially in red maps. We have 58% block from the 40 on the base shield, as well as some scaling on our tree. Lastly, we also use Sigil of Power with our offhand weapon swap. So whenever we weapon swap here, you can see that we have a plus lightning spells staff as well as cast speed. Those are the only mods that matter in this context. We use that to cast our Sigil of Power with magnified effect as well as persistence. Moving on to our passive tree. On the Ascendancy, we first grabbed our Arcane Surge and Arcane Surge effect. Then went on to grab our elemental damage taken recouped as energy shield, just to provide us with another layer of that defense. And the last 2 points will be put into strike twice, so we can get a second shock off for that single target. We passed through the energy shield nodes to start, picked up all of these energy shield, regen, and mana nodes, passed across to grab our energy shield and mana nodes here. Now, on our offhand curse setup, we have some other nodes here, but I'll go after those in the very end. We then path up through here, make sure to grab both the lightning damage and shock and freeze and cold damage nodes down here. Pathing through, eventually we will grab these skill effect duration nodes here. That's probably for 90 to 93 We grab this energy shield node here, as well as the stun recovery and threshold right next to it, and then path up to mind over matter. That's why we have an incredibly high effective health pool on this build, so we can drain through all of our energy shield and then all of our mana before that one life finally ticks down. We also have Arcane Surge effect here, which is really important, and then this cluster here, which is of really high value. It's just an incredibly efficient node. We get cast speed, we get crit, we get all res, high elemental percentage damage, as well as magnitude of ailments, which all works really well for the build. Then I come up here to grab myself some percentage mana, as well as this jewel socket here. I then path through the jewel socket up here to the right to grab all of this lightning damage, especially this node here, 2% per int. We are scaling over 200 int on this build. I got some spell crit and this int and energy shield node, as well as some skill duration for our sparks to stay on the ground for longer and have a higher chance of hitting multiple enemies. Then we move down here, picked up CI, as well as some cold damage. Now these nodes here are incredibly useful, especially this one. Hits ignore elemental resistances of frozen enemies. We freeze very reliably, and you can notice quite distinctly on bosses, whenever they eventually get frozen, it almost feels like the damage we deal to them is being doubled, and that's largely as a result of this node right here. Similarly, the node right below it gives us 50% increased damage with hits against frozen enemies. So the freeze isn't just a defensive gimmick, it does actually provide us with a lot of damage in our single target situations. These nodes down here, we gain spell damage per 100 mana, as well as increased mana and mana cost, and then Eldritch Battery, which I'll just show you what that looks like without the shield here. Without the amulet here, we have no energy shield, and then when we pop that on, we get 3,800. So that's the huge role that Everlasting Gaze plays as a key unique in this build. I will also grab Etherflow. These are my next two nodes that I'm planning to grab, because we are usually casting while moving with this build. Now on the left hand side, we do path down here, grab this jewel socket to grab all of this increased block chance percentage, which just scales the 40% base that we have here. As well as, it doesn't come without damage, we do get 58% right now increased damage for the build as well by pathing here, but it effectively makes us take 60% less damage through the block. It's an incredibly strong defensive tool, and I recommend getting this potentially before maps, even while leveling, is a good time to grab these nodes here. They're incredibly strong for your defenses if you find yourself dying a lot. Now, as you can see, I've allocated the damage nodes for this tree, namely the lightning ones, these two and these two, as well as some of these nodes over here, into my main hand weapon set. My offhand weapon set, and I must give full credit to Captain Lance here, I borrowed this idea from him, basically using our offhand to strengthen and speed up our curses here. Full credit goes to him for this. And these nodes down here as well, which makes our cursed casting near instant, and is just a really good setup for this build and empowers our conductivity in those single target situations. For next steps, as mentioned, I'm looking to grab Etherflow. I'd like to grab Enhanced Barrier, potentially Eldritch Will, as well as these skill effect duration nodes here, and these three projectile speed nodes for my final 13 levels of the character. And that's the build. For jewels, I'd recommend just prioritizing crit, spell crit, and energy shield, and anything else that's useful. For your loot filter, I'd recommend adding Expert Hexer's Robe, as that's the tier 1 energy shield base currently. I'll put a line into the description of this video that you can add into your loot filter. It'll make it look like a chaos on the NeverSync version, unless you want to customize it yourself on his website. And yeah, no, thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm will look at all the comments and answer them, so I'm sure I might have left something out. I hope you guys enjoyed the guide, and looking forward to the next video. Hope you guys are enjoying early access as much as I am, and all the best. Take care, guys.